You're watching Inside the Musician's Brain. I'm your host, Chris Pandolfi from the infamous String Dusters, and you're about to hear part of my conversation with one of the great legends of the five-string banjo, my mentor, my friend, the amazing Tony Trischka from episode 51 of the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tell us, what do you think are some of the most important things to think about when you're learning five-string banjo? Bluegrass style. What are some of the bedrock things that students need to focus on?
It's funny. There's some John Hartford quote about this. So when you play the banjo, just love it. Love it to pieces. Go to bed with it. It's some quote very close to that. And that's what it was for me. It's Bela and I wrote a tune that a rap about not rap music, but some short dissertation about the banjo. The banjo, it's round, and Bela had John Hartford recite that on
the Bluegrass Sessions.
Yeah, the Bluegrass Sessions.
Yeah.
And he and I wrote this. We were playing the Birchmere, and we sat down at dinner and wrote that thing. But that's it. I mean, it's this beautiful. It's round. It's got this beautiful white head on it, and this crazy fifth string that sticks off the side. It's just the whole vibe of it, the whole look of it, and all that chrome, all that shiny stuff. It's iconic just to look at the thing. And every once in a while, I'll look at one of my banjos. I got one right next to me here, and I'll just like, man, that's really cool. The banjo's a cool thing.
I agree.
But, so you got to love it. That's one thing. I've been obsessed since I was a kid, and I'm still totally obsessed. But I mean, timing, that's the main thing. Work on your timing. I wrote a beginning banjo book many years ago, and after writing it, I figured I should get other people's opinions. And I asked John Hartford, well, what would you say to a beginner? He said, timing. Timing is everything. And then I asked Bela, and he said, tell the beginner to play music that they like. Play the tunes that they like.
That's great advice.
Because I remember when I was taking lessons, I loved almost all of it, but then I had to learn Sally Gooden, and I couldn't figure out what's the melody there, the way Earl played it. Didn't make sense to me, and so I let that drop. But the other tunes I played, it was only some years later that I got back into Sally Gooden and thought, oh, that's really cool. But yeah, play music you like. But timing is the main thing. Work with a metronome or some sort of timekeeping device. Earl didn't need to, and you know the story that Earl and his brother Horace would play guitar, Earl's playing the banjo, they do Sally Gooden, and then they walk around opposite sides of the house, of their house where they grew up, and meet in the back, and if they're still in time, they had it. Otherwise, they'd walk back to the front playing. And that was their metronome. But yeah, work with a metronome, really work on your timing, get that down. And so I still play the metronome, and so does Bela, and you probably do too, I imagine.
There was a right hand exercise that I remember you showed me back in the day that I still do to this day. And this is like sort of drilling down on the timing thing, because for those of you out there who are checking out banjo, the one thing that all great banjo players have in common is the right hand, is that way to articulate the notes, whether they're, simpler, like when you're talking about Jim Mills or some of these more modern bluegrass guys, they stick to the melody and they play something that or if you're listening to Tony or Bela, Scott Vestal.
Or you.
Well, the point here is the right hand and the timing, the delivery. You can do a lot with a little if you have a really strong right hand. And I know over the years, I've definitely feel like there have been hurdles to get over, and a lot of that for me is about undoing the tension that you sometimes have in your right hand. Because I think when people want to, especially start to play fast, because I know, I'm taught a good bit over the years, as most people have. A lot of players, I think, are sort of intimidated by the speed of bluegrass, and you hear all this really fast bluegrass. And ironically, the faster it gets, the more relaxed you need to get in your right hand. And this exercise was just really playing one finger at a time and just trying to pay attention to, that's the exercise, just playing, say index finger, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, and just really paying attention to the tension that's in your hand and trying to, sort of train yourself, get that muscle memory going to be as relaxed as you possibly can with the right hand. Does that ring a bell?
It does. It does. I didn't remember that. But yeah, absolutely. Another thing that's really important is to have good, and J.D. Crowe used this term. I asked him, it was also for the same book, I said, what would you say to a beginner? J.D. said, well, make sure you're in tune. I said, yeah, it is important. You got to get your ears used to what being in tune means. He also said have really good separation of notes. And I said, well, what do you mean by that, J.D.? And he said, every note you play with your right hand should be really clear and strong. If you're playing a more progressive piece that's more laid back, you still want to have every note to be articulated. But especially in bluegrass, you want every note to really be present. And lots of times people are weak on their first string with their middle finger. And I don't know why it is. Sometimes it's the fifth string, but everyone who's listening to this should record themselves and see, is every note I'm playing really clear, or are certain notes getting lost? And on my artist work site, people can send in videos, and I see this all the time, where not everybody, but a lot of the time people are a little weak with one finger or another. And then I'll say, well, you got to work on your separation of notes, with your middle finger, let's say, on the first string. And people are so used to playing with a certain amount of pressure that it's a little bit of a leap to get used to hitting the string harder than that. But as you said, you want to still be relaxed. You want to be able to be relaxed and still get a big sound.
That's where the magic happens, where your right hand is relaxed. You can still play hard. You can still play powerfully, but you're not tensing. You're not injecting tension into your arm. I remember when I came for lessons, I remember the first day that we hung out, and I had my Marantz tape deck, and I would record, hours of, and I wanted you to show me a bunch of hot licks, I remember, and you wanted me to learn Earl Scruggs. But I remember very clearly in that first lesson, you made that point about articulation, and I think I seem to remember you had almost a term for it, there are too many throwaway notes or something, notes that just weren't coming out. And that is the magic of Earl. And of course, JD is right there with him as an amazing example of, you hear every single note that they play, but even within that, there's a control. So certain notes kind of pop out a little bit more, and that melody stands out. But for me, that's a lifelong practice, I think, is trying to get my right hand more relaxed. But it's just like anything, it just takes practice.
Yeah.
In terms of practicing and learning banjo, and I suppose you could even sort of think of this as zooming out from banjo specifically, but what about practicing? What do you recommend your students do to practice well and to make the most of their time? Is that something that you focus on with your students?
Yeah, I think, well, that's such a big topic. To start with, there are kind of two approaches. A lot of people have 9-to-5 jobs. They don't, they're not shiftless musicians like we are. And, but basically, if you have a regular job and a family, and a lot of my students are older folks who have retired. I played the banjo when I was a kid or in college, and I'm coming back to it now. But for folks that have a regular job, you can suggest take an hour, let's say, and divide it into quarters into 15 minutes each. And maybe for the first quarter, do some warm-up exercises for the first 15 minutes, so you're not just trying to hit a tune. If there are any kind of exercises you can do, play, really slowly, or just work on some slides or whatever it might be, or work on scale patterns. Second, this is all hypothetical. Second quarter, just work on whatever your last lesson was, so you can have that up and running. And then work on the new lesson for the third quarter, whatever the new lesson is. And then the fourth quarter, just jam out, write a tune, improvise,
have fun,
have fun, come up with your own ideas.
Yeah.
And that's just, one way to look at it. And I talked to Bela about this one point, and he said what he would do was, because he doesn't just have a solid hour necessarily, he's got kids or he's got to do some business or whatever, but he would just have the banjo out in the stand. And that's the other thing I would recommend. Have your banjo out, and don't have it in the case under the bed. or in a closet, because you'll be much less likely to play it. Just have it sitting there so a seduction can occur, which is something that Duke Ellington talked about once passing his piano. If it's right there, you're more likely to play it. But anyway, Bailey said just, he'll sit down for, I got 10 minutes. I'll sit down, I'll play for 10 minutes. And then he's busy for an hour, then goes back for another half hour, whatever, through the day, if you have the luxury of that kind of a thing. And I've heard, classical people talk about this, that, you don't want to force yourself to play, which is, for an hour, okay, I've got an hour, but you may not be in the mood to play, but if that's all you've got. So there are two ways of looking at that.
How do you warm up for a performance?
It's funny. Usually it'll just be some Scruggs thing. I'll just kind of maybe play Fireball Mail, like I say, or Emotional Blues, or whatever it might be, something like that. Wes Corbett, wonderful banjo player who plays with Sam Bush.
Sure.
He said when you first take out your banjo, first thing in the day, just play one note. Just do. Listen to it. Listen to the decay, and that's what I interviewed him for my site, and he just said, just hit one note and just connect with your instrument that way. Which from time to time I do something like that. It's kind of a Zen thing.
That's cool.
And yeah, sometimes I do left hand exercises, doing hammer-ons, and because we're so focused on the right hand, but left hand, there's timing with hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides, and that sort of thing. And I have exercises I do. Is there
anything more specific to like the performance aspect that you think about, or are you sort of at a point in your career where getting up and performing is just the most normal thing ever?
It's pretty normal. Just preparing psychically to walk on stage.
Yeah, I've been performing for a long time, but I know that still is something that takes attention, and some nights you're just like totally in the zone, and other nights you're thinking a little bit more about it and maybe getting in your own way, and just trying to kind of understand that and hone that in a little bit.
Yeah, well, this is not quite that, but one thing I think is it's very easy to get totally self-critical when you're playing. And I know I do it, like, I fluffed that note, and I don't beat myself up about it. I've seen people do that. They play and then they just stop playing. I'm so angry at myself, but I don't do that. But I sort of just have a very subtle little grimace. Or if the timing isn't right in the pocket for a moment, it's like, yeah. But I'm reading a book called Effortless Mastery by a guy named Kenny Warner.
Kenny Warner.
That book, yeah.
Yeah. And
he talks about that sort of thing. And one thing he talks about is free improvising, and just put your hands on the fingerboard and just play whatever comes out. And if you're a Scruggs head, just play a Scruggsy thing, or just put your fingers on someplace on the banjo, on the fingerboard, that maybe you've never been before. It's a position you don't usually use, and then start rolling, and then move one finger down, half step, or one up a fret, or whatever, fret the fifth string, whatever comes out. And he was saying, get this attitude that every note is a beautiful note, even if it's dissonant. Every note is a beautiful note, and I'm feeling great. And just, it's sort of a positive reinforcement sort of thing. And
it's like a self-talk thing almost.
Yeah, exactly. And since reading about that, I've been doing a lot of free improvising, which I've done in the past too. I used to do that in my shows. I would ask someone when I would do a solo show, okay, have someone in the audience give me a key to jam out in free improv. And when they started talking about F sharp and G sharp, I sort of gave up on that. But I'm doing it a lot these days as sort of a warm up. And then I find, with a metronome, and then I find when I play whatever I have to play that's more, quote, normal, it just feels better. And plus, it gives me all sorts of new ideas. I find my playing is more, I have more fresh ideas, because I did our son Sean took lessons from a drummer here in town in New Jersey. And this drummer got in touch with me one day and said, I'd like to do a gig with you and Andy Statman, three of us, banjo, mandolin, and percussion. And I booked this gig in downtown New York, Manhattan, and I want to call it free grass. We won't rehearse anything. There'll be no tunes. We're just going to get up on stage and start
Tony.
associating.
I love it.
And we did 2 45-minute sets like that, just the three of us. And we'd play for like 8 minutes, and then it would just end. And then we'd start something else. And that we'd play for 3 minutes, and it would end. And it was such a great experience because the next night I did a regular gig, and the ideas were flowing like crazy.
No kidding. That's so cool.
Up. So this whole idea of free association, playing freely where there are no wrong notes, and you can do no wrong. It's just, this is what's coming out in the moment.
I love
think
that.
It really helps your attitude a lot. So
yeah,